So at this point, I probably don't need to say much about my block-in. You guys understand that process. You've been going through it, and you've been watching me do it on a number of the different videos. So for this one, what I'm going to be doing is adjusting the edge range. So I'm going to make the edges a lot softer than what I see on this reference. There's a lot of hard edges on this reference, and there are some that are very, very soft. But I'm going to take the whole thing, and in the same way I would compress the values and work with a smaller value range, I'm going to do the same thing with edges. So I'm not going to go for extreme value contrast when I'm doing this. You know, I'm not going to try to punch the darks and make them as dark as I possibly can, and I'm not going to try to make the lights as bright as I possibly can, because I want my values to work for me. You know, I don't want my value scheme to work against me. And when I'm going for, you know, a softer look when it comes to the edges, having the values be closer together already sets me up to have a softer impression of what's going on, if that makes sense. Edges and values are, most of the time, they're intertwined. To some degree, they're intertwined. So if you can get your values to work for you, if you want, you know, for instance, if you want harder edges on someone, then maybe you should, you know, make the values a little bit more contrasty. You know, so I'm not deviating too much from what's there on the original with this one, but I am going to take the whole entire value scheme a little bit lighter. So you can see I blocked in the shadow areas. I'm blocking in the two major values in the shadows. I'm also going in the lights and indicating some of those transition values in the lights, like we talked about with the 5 values and like you've seen me do. So I'm going to start working from that transition area outward. And I also need to establish where the hardest edges are and where the softest edges are. You know, there's a number of hard edges down the arm in the lower left. The hair where it's folding over the face, there are some harder edges on this one. And so I'm going to look to those, you know, to give me cues to how hard I should make an edge. And then I'm going to look for the really soft edges, like on the forehead or, you know, different areas of the arm, actually, where it's transitioning from the dark to the light. Different areas that are softer that I can look to as well. I'm going to look at all those different areas and use them as sort of the extremes, use them as a gauge to figure out how soft I should make these other edges. So you can see I'm getting in that lightest value too. You know, establishing that the lightest value in the lights and starting to get a sense of the edges. You know, just a little bit. But right now I'm mainly just breaking it down to the lights and the darks, and I'm indicating the edges slightly there, but nothing. I'm not committing to anything quite yet. Just trying to get a sense of what's happening with the values first. And this one is actually a little bit tricky in terms of proportion as well. If you get it even a little bit wrong, it doesn't look right. You know, so I've got to adjust that. Now see, look, I'm starting right here. Now look at those are very soft edges on the original. They're pretty soft. I'm going to make them even softer on this one. You know, and at this point, it's very important that I stay aware of what I'm doing. You know, I can't just start copying what I'm seeing on the original. I have to really start thinking about what I'm doing, and I need to make sure that I'm comparing one edge to another while I'm working this way, that I'm not just saying, okay, you know, what are the edges doing and on the original? Okay, yeah, let me just do that. No, I need to think, how soft is this edge compared to the edges that are around it? How hard is this edge compared to the edges that are around it? It's not enough for me to just say, how hard or how soft is this? I need to get it to fit right in the mix. And like I said, you can see on the hair over there, I've started to really soften things on this cheek, which is a pretty soft edge on the original. You can see a really clear transition area, but I'm going to make that very, very soft. See that? It's going to be a very, very soft transition, a very long transition there. I'm going to get it to be much softer than the original. Just filling in the values a little bit there. But again, you can see in each area I'm erring on the side of softness. Have to establish that nose, get the right shapes in there. It's a little bit tricky. Look at that cheek. That's so soft in that area. The transition is barely, you know, you can see it's just very, very soft on the original. So that on mine has to be like a cotton ball there. Very, very soft. Now the lips present an interesting problem. It's very tricky, and the chin as well. The lips especially have pretty hard edges. It's kind of like the eyelids as well. You have to make them softer, but you can't make them so soft that they don't read correctly. So that's one of those things that's very, very difficult. You have to really watch out for that. But in general, I would say, if you can err in a mouth, no matter what you're doing, if you can err on the side of softer edges, it usually reads better. It usually does. A lot of times people really want to make that crisp, and it ends up flattening the lips quite a bit, especially the corners of the mouth. Most people make the corners of the mouth very hard edge, and you definitely want to soften that. You want to err on the side of making it softer than you think it needs to be. So take a look. See, that's a pretty hard edge under that eye too. And also the eyelid. I'm going to have to come back and really soften that. But also, what I'm thinking about right now too is I'm imagining all of these areas of light and dark as shapes, and I'm having to think about these edges. I'm having to also think about the values I'm using, and I'm having to think about the proportion as well. It's very tricky. You've got to take your time. This is sped up quite a bit. I'm thinking about all these things as I'm working. I don't want to overstate the lights in that eye right there, and I want to make sure that the values are reading properly, that they're in proper relationship to one another. I don't want to overstate the reflected light there in the nose, and also the highlight in the nose. I don't want to go too bright there. And you can see mid-process when I'm working on this too, it's looking a little weird. That's normal. When you're working out the shapes, especially when you want to try to go for a likeness, things can look weird for a little while. A shift one way or the other, even by a millimeter of moving an eye or a nose or a mouth, can make a huge difference on a portrait. And so, when you're mid-process, it can end up looking a little bit strange sometimes, and that's okay. Don't rush to fix things when you see that happening. Just take your time, analyze what's going on, really, break it down, proportion, value, and edge, and figure out what's going right and what's going wrong, and then make the changes you need to. See how soft I'm making that edge under the eye there? Making it much, much softer. That's a really soft transition on the forehead, too, that I really want to capture. See, I'm bouncing around so I stay fresh, so my eye stays fresh. Got that dark area under the eye right there. Don't want to state it that dark. But now I need to move the eye down, and that's what I start doing here. The eye was in the wrong place. I'm not going to persist in keeping it there. I'm just going to break it down, make it more simple, move the eye. Get it in the right place. I'm not just going to live with it being in the wrong place, Just taking a little bit of time, moving the eye, going back to the simplified version of it. So there we go. I'm softening that edge there in that chin. That's a pretty soft edge there in the chin, leading from the lights into those shadow areas. Let's see, I'm moving that eye. I'm focusing just on the light and dark shapes at this point. And anytime you have to move the eye like that or move any feature, it looks very strange mid-process, and it could be a little bit disconcerting. But again, you're just looking at all these things as light and dark shapes. That's all they are. So when you have to move it, just move it. Don't overdo it, but you want to be decisive. And it's okay for me to leave it that simple now. Trying to get the shape of that mouth, but again, I'm going to have to adjust those edges before the end because those edges in the mouth are getting a little bit hard. Let's see, I'm defining that part of the eye. And the proportion is already looking better. The likeness is much closer now, just by moving that eye. And where she's looking and her expression is much better with that eye moved a little bit. Just that little bit of change makes a big difference. Now look at that. See, I'm going back over that, making that softer. All of that in the eye is going to end up getting softer as well. I'm going to be looking for lost edges there where when I squint down and look at the reference, when I squint down and look at the reference and I see where these, values and areas are grouping up, I'm going to, make that a lost edge. And you can see that in there. I'm starting to do that in there. Group up those values there like they do when I squint and look at the original. Because remember, I'm making everything much softer. And those edges are a little bit crisp in the eye. So it's good. I have things in a better position now. The likeness is starting to read. Much, much better now. But it still is in that funky stage. So let's move on to the second part of this video where I start refining things even a little bit more. And I'll keep those edges soft.